I want to thank this opportunity from the National Flute Association to doing this presentation. I've done a similar presentation a few years ago, I believe in New Orleans, about a topic that I'm still developing, and it has been very dear to my heart. And this is about interleaved practice. And you're welcome to post questions on the chat. I'll be looking as I speak. If you want to voice your question, you're welcome to open the microphone and place your question. And this is not a very interactive session, but it can be if you choose to participate. I will ask for your input from time to time, so feel free to voice as well. First of all, we need to deal with a couple of concepts regarding interleaved practice. The first one is about segmenting your practice and breaking down the practice into elements. And I would like to know if anyone here would give us a definition of what they understand as a segmented practice.
Well, just the idea that you do your scales and warm-ups, your long tones, then you do your etudes and other exercises, then you start working on your repertoire, and then anything else that comes up.
Correct. That's a very good definition by Caitlin. Like walk on and you break down what you're gonna practice into different activities of what you're gonna do. You can also do a segmented in a particular topic. For example, you break down a piece into several different segments, and then you practice one segment after another, and you don't necessarily follow from beginning to end. It has been very well established on research that segmenting helps to understand if you break down things into parts. We've all learned that in grade school and in different subjects. I'm doing this myself when I'm teaching my kids fractions now, and where you have to break down into little elements, and then you can do. And we do that in music. We've learned this from our music teachers. We do this to our students as well. But now I want to move that element of segmentation that can be applied either into different activities or into the same piece, into the idea of segmentation and interleaving. So does anyone here have any idea what interleaved practice would be? Or just the word interleaved? Or have anyone heard about that word before being applied in a different subject or activity? Again, you can post on the chat or raise your hand and talk, or just talk. One more second. Well, what I've been researching and understand as interleaved is not a term that I created. I will start before I give a definition by giving an example of something that's interleaved. If we imagine the petals of a flower, a rose, for example, the petals are interleaved to each other. And there are, many examples in nature. And one example of someone doing an interleaved activity would be, if you remember that movie Back to the Future, and that there was that crazy scientist that had his lab, doing a million things at the same time. He's interleaving his activities. He's switching from one thing to the next and coming back and doing back and forth. So that's interleaving. And that is a term that has been in a type of activity that has been used a lot in sports, has been used a lot in mathematics. It has been researched extensively, and it has been done in music somewhat. If you listen to that podcast, The Bulletproof Musician, or you read those articles, you will come across this term quite a bit, interleaved. Uh, Let me see if I can mute people. All right. While you're trying to see if we can mute everybody, let me continue talking about this. So one thing that I'll try to raise my volume here, that might help. Can you guys hear me better? Okay, good. I think the background noise is where I am actually. So if you, I was starting with the mad scientist idea, where it breaks down from several different activities. The Bulletproof Musician, it's a blog and a podcast that's very interesting about interleaving also. And what we apply in our music field is to have a set of segmented activities that Caitlin mentioned to us, and you start consciously choosing certain activities to repeat them after you have visited other activities. So you will practice sound technique, and instead of practicing for an extensive amount of time, you will stop at certain time, practice something else, and come back to your sound activity. This will create the interleaving effect of learning, forgetting, and relearning. So when you start revisiting activities, you start fomenting memorization and solidifying your understanding of the topic. Now, when I get to this point of the lecture, a lot of people raise their hands and they ask, when do I need to switch activities? And I would like to ask you here to give me a number on the chat from how many minutes should you be doing an activity before you stop and jump into another activity to start doing either segmentation or an interleaving. So please write on your chat, on our chat here, a number. How many minutes or hours or how much time do you think you should devote to any specific activity before it becomes less effective? Look at that. We got 5 to 8, 1 to 5, 5 to 6, 10, 15 to 20, 5, 10. Good. Those are very, very good answers. Research has shown that 3 minutes is the maximum. I know, very, very short, isn't it? Yeah, incredibly short. After 3 minutes, your brain starts moving into a coasting manner, where you are, yes, in music you might be improving, but your brain's already full of information and is not retaining much anymore. When you come back and revisit everything that passed 3 minutes, it's probably washed out. And I remember when I gave this presentation in New Orleans a few years ago, someone raised their hand, but you know, like, but I got in the groove and I want to practice 20 minutes something. Like, you know, why should I do it? It's like, well, you're welcome to do it. You're just wasting 17 of those 20 minutes. And I've been guilty of that myself many, many times. Uh, so sometimes, I did some tests with my students of, you know, having a stopwatch, and every 3 minutes it beeps. You go to something else, and then you come back. And I got two effects. One, that it is effective. The second effect was that everybody hated it. It was really displeasing way to practice. It was very annoying, interruptive, and exhausting after you do several activities in a row. So even though it has been proven in research, it does not is not a pleasant way of doing it, unless you're a mad scientist and you can keep like jumping from one topic to another and doing one thing to another, and you don't you know, I'm sure you've seen people like that naturally do that. And as a matter of fact, I have a interesting story that one time that I had to host Sir James Gowrie for a few years, for a few days at my university. I had a job for a day of getting him into the hall and make sure that no one would show up to interrupt him. So all I had to do is just sit there and watch him practice for an hour. And it was very interesting to see that I don't know if it was 3 minutes, but it was very short. He did a few long tones that were very pretty. He played a couple of scales very slowly, very beautifully. He played some orchestral excerpts, like very slowly, very pretty, and that which remind me, oh yeah, that his first job was at London Symphony. He is an orchestral player. And then he played a few of the tricks that he was gonna use in the concert. He started playing slowly things that he was not gonna play that night. He came back, played a little more things, got a sip of water, continued doing that. It was a whole hour where he did many little things. He never played through the entire repertoire. He never tested his speed. He never made himself nervous. He never played, uh, to exhaustion. And then at the end of the day, we got into talking about different topics, and I told about, interleaved practice, what I was researching. And he was like, wow, this is a genius thing, like we should do this more. And then I was like, well, you already do this. You just don't know it. So a lot of us do that intuitively, but sometimes we get stuck into spending a lot of time in a particular activity. And it's important to remember that magical number of 3 is very telling. Now, another number that I would like a pull from you is how many things can you keep track of your list of segmented things that you're going to do when you're practicing, or your list of things that you are keeping tab on your activity. This is also a limited number that you can do. So please use the chat again and write a number. So how many things you put in your to-do list to get it done? We're going 8, 3, 3 or 4, 3, 1 at a time, 5, 3. We haven't got the number yet. 7. Kristen, you got a prize. You got the right number. It's 7. Now, Kristen, could you tell us why did you guess that number? Was this a wild guess, or Kristen is available to talk? I don't want to put her in the spot, but I took psychology. Yes. So yes, there is a paper in psychology called 7 plus minus 2. 7 is the magic number, and 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 it's, I don't know, it might be ingrained in your brain. You can think about two examples in our daily lives: the 7 days of the week, 7 deadly sins, and other things. But we tend to, as humans, we tend to be able to store 7. As a matter of fact, phone numbers were originally 7 for that reason. It was the maximum number that was easy to store. And we tend to group things in 3s and 4s up to 7. If it's more than 7, we tend to forget them. If it's less than 7, we tend to neglect them. So this old research, I think they had examples of giving list of supermarket lists to people or a bunch of numbers, and this is what happens. If the numbers were too big, people got overwhelmed, and if the numbers were too small, people would just walk into the supermarket and just forget what they're supposed to be doing there because it was just too easy, so they didn't even pay attention to what it was. All right, so I've been giving a lot of little concepts, and I'm going to start tying them together now into what I called the spider web or spider log practice system. So we had the segmentation, which breaking things into little segments. We have this concept of interleaving, where you revisit things at certain times, and inside interleaving, you have the ability to learn something, forget about it, and then revisit that something and bringing back to your memory. So you learn and forget and learn and forget. We have the number 3 of trying to spend the minimum amount of necessary time in very focused attention in one activity. And then we have this number of 7, where, keeping tab of 7 things, it's not only healthy, but it's recommended in terms of effectiveness. So I came up with a design of kit that add one more element, which is symmetry. We as humans like to have things symmetrical. We don't like when things are lopsided. We like things that have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So I create a design that creates a graphic feedback based on symmetry. So I changed the number 7 to 8 for sake of symmetry. All right, now, before I show this template that I use for practice, let me tell you a story about a couple failed attempts that I have at this. One was about making the lists and using a timer, which I mentioned to you before, and that a lot of my students didn't like. I didn't like, and it was very draconian, where when the stopwatch would beep or a timer would beep, and then you have to move into something else. The second thing is that I created, when I was trying to get a graphic feedback, like a visual feedback of what you're practicing, I create a graph that would have on the left corner, I would have the amount of time that you spend practicing something, and on the horizontal line, I would have the particular things that you're practicing. And in order to encompass all the students, I put all the possible etudes or possible activities that all my students were doing in the studio. So it was a big list. And the vertical part was, just in minutes or just check if you did it or not. And then we did this for a couple of weeks, myself and my students. And every time you practice something, you just put a check mark or you put the minutes that you practice that particular thing. That would give a graphic feedback of what you practice and how much you practice. So when you walk into your lesson, you knew and I would know, what did you do and how long do you've done it. Because that graph had on the horizontal line an enormous amount of activity, because it was all the students in the studio, for everybody, the graph looked very, very sparse, because not everybody was doing everything that was in that list. So it was very interesting to see immediately what I have practiced and immediately what my student has done, what my freshman was doing, what my graduate students were doing. Everybody has slightly different graph, but everyone's graph was very, very bare. I knew that because it was reflecting the entire studio, but every single student from the graduates to the undergrads complained about it because it looked very, very bare. It looked very discouraging. And it was incredibly powerful visually because everyone complained. It has a very negative effect, but it has a very strong effect. And obviously, this was just an experiment for a couple of weeks as we was trying to develop a graph that would look easier to do. But I took that to heart, that how powerful that feedback was, even though obviously it was negative. So what I'm going to show you right now is a graph that I use. So I hope you can see this that I created. There we go. So you should be able to see something with lines, a bunch of numbers, and a circular, 4 lines, horizontal and vertical, 2 diagonal lines. So this is what I created that I call the spider log. And I'll walk through how to build this spider log, and that will explain all the features on this practice system. There is an actual spider log that you can purchase, but as you can see here, you can use just a piece of paper to do what I'm doing here, and it's more about an idea than anything else. Let me move this down here so this doesn't bother you. And I'll circle the areas here so you see what they are and what they do, and then we'll write together things in here. This first area here, oops. A second. This first area here is the date. It's very important to put a place in context of time. So whenever you start a new project, whenever you're starting a new practice, it's important to locate that in time. So I'm doing this on this date, and this is what's happening from here. It could be a week, could be a day that you're practicing. And so you locate. The second part in here is the name of your project. So you're gonna be naming it. It's gonna be your daily practice. It's gonna be your particular piece of music, a particular movement of a piece of music, and I will go through those examples. And then this area here are your tasks. And actually it's not tasks, are your activities. That's the real important difference here. These activities are things that you will be doing constantly and you want to keep track of them. So those are the things that are being segmented, and there are things that will be interleaved. So that's why we talked about those elements before, segmenting and interleaving. They will go in here. And then this graphic area here down below, this is where the visual representation of your activities will be placed. So we're gonna go together here and we're gonna write down or log here. So today is March 6, 2022. And let me see, can someone write me what this practice will be? Someone can give me a name for this. I'm trying to keep you watching and participating. So someone can give me a name. It could be daily practice, could be daily practice. Look at this. Then you can see my beautiful hand writing here. And as you know, English is not my first language, and daily is one of those words that sometimes I misspell. Okay, daily practice, there you go. Okay, so now look at that. Susan already said warm-ups. I mean, okay, but she was warm-up would be something that you do on a daily thing. So we could actually get Susan idea here and put warm-up. Okay. But what would be a second thing that you do every time you do daily practice? Scales. What else would you practice daily? Long tones, scaling, etudes. Long tones would be probably fit in the warm-up. So I will skip that one. Oops, sorry. My gosh, sorry. I forgot my stylus in the car and I'm writing with my finger. Etudes. And here, number 4, Tafanel number 4. That's very good. Arpeggios. Arpeggios. And you could be, for example, Tafanel 11, you know. So EJ11 was a good one for arpeggios there. EJ4 for, and you can write here, for example, EJ4, you're working articulation, you know. What else? Someone wrote studies, etudes. I wrote etudes. What else do you practice every day? Dynamics. Yeah, so dynamics. You could put like an etude here, some particular etude. I don't know. Or Lemoy's the phrasing etude about music. That would be a good intonation. Sight reading. Oops, let me fix that S. It looks very ugly. Sight reading and memorization. That's very good. All right, good. So now you have your daily practice there, and you have a list of things that you're going to do on your daily practice. So the next step is to use the graph that's underneath. So now we're going to go to the cha-cha. That's how it works now. So what you're going to do here, I'm going to use a different color here. You're going to put numbers on these areas on here, and you can follow the circle along, or you can be random. So like just today, just because today I randomly stop at this town here, we're going to do this random. 2, 1, 2, 8. It really doesn't matter where you put the numbers. I mean, put outside the circle. That'll be great. 6. What number I haven't used yet? 3, 5, 4. Okay. So you have those numbers, and then so what you have right now, you have a list and you have a graph. And what's going to happen now, you're going to create a dialogue in between what you are trying to do or what you set yourself to do and what you're actually doing. Now, I'll go back to that for a second. When I was talking to my graduate students, when I was talking about segmenting and trying to enforce the three-minute rule to my students, I had a student from France at the time, and he and I were talking about this, and he was very interested in language and psychology, so he was doing a double master's. And he told me that, Dr. Mezzadri, I talked to the other graduate students, and we really don't think that you should be enforcing the time to us, at least. I was like, well, why not? I was like, well, because frankly, I only practice scales for 2 minutes. I don't practice enough, and I don't get to the number that you want us to practice. And some other stuff I feel like doing more. So I don't think time is relevant. I think it's as long as you do the interleaving, that's what matters, not how much time you spend. So we debated on this for a while, and then when we got to this circular spider web graph, we decided to take time from it. So time is not important anymore. So I took the time off, and what you get, going back to the graph here, is that your job is to keep symmetry in place. So obviously, you pick up your flute, and what are you going to do first? Warm up. Yeah, we all try to do that. It's not very wise to go into. I guess you could do other things. But let me see here on the chat. You guys are going to give me an order of what you would do when you start your practice. We're going to start with warm up. And then what happens next? I mean, there's no specific order, but what would you do next? After you did your warm up, you felt like, I'm going to do perhaps you're going to go straight to etudes. Excellent. So, which is number 3. So you did number 3 then. And then you went your scales and arpeggios. Arpeggios is number 4. And your scales is number 2. And then you stop and you go and get a cup of coffee. And you try to come back. And you might do some sight reading. Yeah. You might work on Moise because you a little work on dynamics a little bit, and you did a little bit of technique in Tafanel EJ4, which is kind of like scales as well. And you went to your memorization exercise, and then you completed your day. Look at that. Patty Evans gave us a whole list, and of course breaks. So you do this, and if you at the end of the day you got this circle done, or at the end of 3 times 8, half an hour about, yeah, with breaks, you got all your practice done, and you could revisit that. Yeah, again in a different order, and maybe in the morning, in the afternoon, you've done this. Yeah, maybe the next day you do another practice session. Yeah. And you can do in different orders, or you can see I'm skipping around, but then sometimes you start neglecting things. Yeah. So then you always do your warm up, and then you really worry about your memorization, and then you work on sight reading, and you go back to memorization because you want to really memorize that piece. And then you go and do your TEFNL because you like it, and you keep doing your pages. You have your lesson coming up, so you better know your etude, and you really want to memorize that piece, and you go and do your etude again, and then you warm up because you felt bad about it, and you start doing, I don't know, you go and do your pages again, and you do a little bit of TEFNL, and then you try to memorize the piece again. You do a warm up, do the etudes for lessons, and then you come for your lesson. So when you walk to the lesson now, or when you see this graph after 6 cycles or 7 cycles or a whole week of cycles, you created a visual dialogue in between what is in the graph and what you wrote. And that's what the importance of this thing starts to become evident. This is a graph that doesn't disturb you. Yes, it's not symmetrical, but it creates a dialogue in between, for example, item number 2, which are your scales, and the fact that you only practice 3 times. And for example, item number 4, which are number 5, which are similar scales. So these 2 items are somewhat redundant. So you neglected one because of the other. Sometimes that happens. Or for example, item number 6, which you neglected, on our, hypothetical person here, you neglected that item because maybe you're already doing dynamics when you're doing memorization, and you just like, you know what, I don't really need an item for that. So it creates a list of things that you think, like, I should be doing that. But wait a minute, I'm not doing that because I'm doing something else. So it creates this level of dialogue, but it also creates something that's very important here that we didn't mention. Every time you did one of these lines in here, you took a decision to start and stop something. And you took a decision to start something else and coming back and revisiting that item. So you start doing interleaving yourself. So now let me show you one example on a real piece of repertoire. This example is based on a piece of music, and it's something that I've done it. So we have here Chaminade Concertino. A lot of you, hopefully all of you, know this piece. And obviously there are challenging spots on this piece. We have, let me mark here, we have this area here that's usually difficult when you go to below C. We have, this thing is very hard. You can tell here that I counted here, so that tends to be hard. And there are several others that, you know, the cadenza is a little bit difficult. So you have all those different spots. So let me show you one where I already marked the spots and I highlighted them in yellow and I put numbers on them. So it's kind of like preparing for the spider log. So I have there two areas on the first page, area number 3 on the top of the page. There are two similar passages. Area number 4, number 5, also those arpeggios. Number 6, that same arpeggio there. Number 7, the beginning of presto. Number 8, the last run in D major at the end of the piece. So those are spots that maybe you should visit constantly when you're learning or memorizing this piece. Maybe you should be your first 8 spots that you like, you know what, I don't know this piece, but my teacher circled those areas for me. I'm going to start there. Marking on the music, those spots is great. But as you start playing the music, you see that highlighted area, you're like, oh no, here comes the problem. It tends to freak you out. It tends to make you nervous. So the next step would be to move this, what I highlighted here, into, oops, not this one here, where you have that same material that you highlighted, you have them in here. Just by measure numbers, there's a date in there, and a concertino, and all you're going to have to do is practice those spots. And as you progress and you try to keep it symmetrical, yeah, you practice them in order and you start keeping symmetrical, you might notice that one of the items becomes very easy. So then you might neglect that item. For example, that run at the beginning, and you decide, you know what, I'm not going to do this, but I'm going to create a new item. So then you go back to the concerto and find something else to practice. So you have always 8 things that you are constantly managing. And that it makes the practice very alive, and it makes you very keen to keep tab of things. I notice with my students and with myself, when I do things symmetrically, if I'm trying to strive symmetrical, it's very easy for me to find something that I thought I was going to do and I don't do it, or things that I'm neglecting because I'm spending too much time on something or something else. That makes my practice, instead of having the stopwatch every 3 minutes, it makes my practice very effective. Sometimes when my kids are coming back from school and they watch like one Netflix episode of 20 something minutes, that's the amount of time I have. So it makes me like, okay, I'm gonna run through all these 8 things very quickly in 20 minutes. So I got to visit them. And then it keeps them fresh in my head. I was very surprised how quickly, I'm not very good at memorizing, but how quickly I memorize music after I start practicing in that way. Now, I would like to open for questions for you right now. And as I'm going to be looking for some pictures of 8 students who have done this, and I want to share some pictures with you on that. But while I'm doing that, so please, if you have any questions, feel free to open your microphone and ask me, or type here on the chat. Any comments? I'm sure there must be some comments or questions. Would you spend 3 minutes on each one of the 8 activities? Do you set a timer? That's a great question, Irene. I do. You're very welcome, Lisa. I do set a timer sometimes when I'm practicing. I do a couple things with the timer. I use this, and again, this is not an endorsement. I use an app, a metronome app that keeps a track of the time, and it beeps and stops the time. It stops the metronome once I'm using it. Once I reach the time that I want to set for that practice, so it doesn't beep to me. It just like gets quiet. Sometimes I ask Siri, and I hope she doesn't beep. No. I ask her to start a timer for me. So I do that once in a while. I try to get things symmetrical. When I'm doing something that's very quick, like in 20 minutes, I want to go through everything, I do use a timer. But sometimes when I'm keeping track of bigger projects, I tend not to do. How many logs do you use a day? That's a great question. I have a couple of different logs that move around. I have one that I keep track of different activities that I have to do, like projects that I'm doing or service. That log moves very, very slowly through the month. And sometimes it's very painful when I see something being neglected. And I have logs for specific pieces that I'm gonna do. So let me share this pictures on my Google here photo. This is when I was doing the jet whistle. So you can see that this was a practice of like 4 days only. So I had some measure numbers, some scales. You see in Roman numerals the movements, and you see on the left side on the blank page, it was just like where I take notes. This is a different one. I guess the same picture. These are different pieces. This is different. So as you can see, this started as a baby one that didn't work very well. Let me see. Oh, these are some students on the summer festival that I teach, that they created their own, and you can see that like they have activities that are not necessarily music related. Clean my bunk, play scale, drink a bottle of water. So those are activities that they had to do. They imposed themselves what to do, and they just kept track for a week of doing it. So as you can see, things sometimes get symmetrical, sometimes they don't, and that's what makes interesting. This is I kept this one because not necessarily for what they wrote in here, but they didn't like spiders, so they drew little triangles. So they got like a little flower design on their log. And so these are from the summer festival. Let me see if I can have some other that are. I think I have. Oh yeah, let me talk about this here. So this one, as you can see, there's a little spider there, a little sticker. I give stickers to my students when they finish practicing. If they get symmetrical, they get a sticker. This one should not have gotten a sticker. I don't know why I got it, but it did. As a positive reinforcement. So something that once you finish your week of practice and you manage to get symmetrical, go and get a cup of coffee, put a little sticker in there, put a smiley face. You got it. Have you memorized a piece of music? Maybe not. You're still working on it, but you were able to keep the dialogue working in between what you're trying to do and what you accomplished. Let me see if I can show you the one that I have. I'm gonna have to use my camera here and open my flute bag. Let me stop sharing here and I see if you have questions here. How many? Okay, you have. If you have, let's say, 6 pieces that you have a month to prepare, would you do one on each piece every day? Yes, you can do. You can run 6 spider logs if you want, or maybe you can. Sometimes some pieces are simple enough that you can. You could take just a line in the spider log, run this piece, run slash listen to this piece if it's an easy piece. Uh, some pieces, the entire piece is easy, but it has like 5 little areas that are very difficult. So then you could combine, into one log several different areas. I would not run a large log, a log of 16 things. That is very counterproductive. I've noticed on my own practice. If I do that, I tend to get lost because and I noticed that goes against this, the 7 number, the perfect number. Okay, so this is my own practice here. Let me show. This is a new book. This I had this past week. I had to do the classical symphony with the Tupelo Symphony. So I had the measure numbers that I practice, and then the 4 days before the concert where I revisit them. And then there's one tiny little note on this side where it's just run the first movement. So like first movement, just run through it, fine, just do it. Second movement, didn't touch it at all. Third movement, all of them are on the fourth movement. All that first run at the end. So those are the things that I had to practice as I was relearning the piece before the concerto. Would you create this chart for each duet, solo flute, flute with piano, or etudes? I would create for each measure or each activity that needs to be visited. So I wouldn't create a specific item on the spider log or I wouldn't create a specific activity that must be visited if it's an activity that they're going to do it anyway. So I don't write on my spider log on my daily practice to do scales and arpeggios and long tones or etudes because I'm going to do it anyway. So I write things that if I don't do them, I will get in trouble in a week or 2 weeks or in a month because that project is coming. So those are the things that I write it down. Things that I'm going to do it anyway. I just don't write. As if you don't have to write a reminder to brush your teeth or pull up your bed. Maybe you do, but hopefully not. But it depends on the stage. So for beginners, students, I have to write those down so they keep track of their activities. So it depends. Other questions? You're welcome to speak. Gives me a chance to sip my coffee. I did when I was designing this project. I was showing to my sister. She's a graphic designer, and she was helping me to put this together in something that I could give to my students. And her husband is mechanical engineering, and 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 I was explaining what this was for and how you segmented the music and what you do, and I explaining to him some examples in mathematics, and then he was like, hey, I could use these on my projects in engineering. So this is very flexible in a way that you can use in different facets of your life. I have a colleague that used that when he's managing editing tracks. So he does his recording, his mixing, and then he writes down 8 things that need to be done or 8 clients to make sure that he's not losing track of the clients. If there is a number 9, he tried to get, one of the 8 down so he can, manage it, add the new one into it. Yes, Suzuki-sama Sarah wrote that using the Suzuki method, this will certainly work with Suzuki. Of course, Suzuki has a whole different facet of parents participating in the practice and memorization. But yes, this is a lot of in Suzuki is about segmenting and revisiting they have a game of coin where as you progress the coin in the music stem, uh, you can get faster in the metronome, and then if you fail to repeat 3 times, the coin goes back. So you can play those games as that's a way of interleaving and it's a way of segmenting. So the Suzuki is great. Do you keep notes about each item that you're practicing and so where? Okay, so on my specific practice log, so I have this part where I write the practices, and then on the other part of the book, I have lines where I keep tasks. So things that I need to do, things that I need to practice. So there's a whole list of things that I crossed out. So I started there. I write down, okay, practice this, do this, do this, do this, learn this piece, buy this, do this. So those are not activities, those are action items that I need, like a to-do list. And once I cross them out, they're gone. And some of them get moved into becoming an activity and becoming something that will be revisited several times. And then once the project is gone, I get a sticker, flip the page, move on. Do you keep notes about that you're practicing? So yeah, exactly. So I keep on I don't have on this book here, but I have this blank page on the side, and this is where the garbage that would go in the score goes. So a particular item in this side that needs to go faster, or I'm using the wrong fingering, or I need to use a special fingering or a special type articulation instead of writing on the score, because I have to deal with a lot of rental material, or I don't want to anticipate a mistake by circling things in the score on the musical part. I write that in there, and that creates the prioritization and creates notes to myself of what needs to be done for the next practice. So if I finish a practice and it's on a specific metronome marking, the next day I open the spider log and I look at the metronome marking and say, oh, this is where I left, and I come back from there. What is the length? What length? 1 week, 1 month? That depends on the project. I have some items that have been in my spider log for months. I have some that they expired in 4 days or 5 days, because that's just an emergency item that I have to revisit for a few days, and then I flip. That depends on the item. Very good question. Well, we have 1 minute, so this is the time for the final questions. I'll type here my email. In case you have questions, you're welcome to send me an email. It's my first name dot my last name at usm.edu. And then I'm happy to answer questions that any of you might have, or comments or suggestions. I'm starting to do a quantitative study where I'm going to be sending this to freshmen and sophomore across the country to do a control group and a study group, and see if how effective this really is. Daniel, my presentation is done. I hope I didn't bore them to death.
No, it was fantastic. Thank you. I'm going to use some of that for my personal life too.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Good.